You heard President Obama requesting $3.7 billion from Congress to handle the crisis on the border. But how much of that money is actually going towards the U.S. military, the group that's been housing illegals at its bases and patrolling the border? Zero. Is the president shortchanging our armed forces by involving them in this crisis without boosting their funding? Joining me now is Congressman and veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Adam Kinzinger. Good morning, Congressman.
Hey, Peter. Good morning. How are you?
There seems to be a disconnect here. The president's saying spend almost $4 billion, but not a dollar of that appropriation seems to go to National Guard or active military. What's that about?
Yeah, look, I think it's an issue. I mean, at the end of the day, the president's probably, if he really wants to solve the border crisis, at least in the short term, is probably going to have to deploy National Guard soldiers to alleviate what the Border Patrol's having to do that's not apprehending people at the border, like President Bush did in 2006 with Operation Jumpstart. At the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, he still sent National Guard to the border of Mexico, specifically in Arizona, to build up that border. The president's probably going to have to do the same thing. But we're also trying to alleviate some of the drug trafficking and narco-terrorism that we see in Central and South America. That falls under Southcom. Southcom needs to be well-resourced to be able to combat the front end of why we're seeing a lot of these kids come up here to the border. And also you have, these kids that are being housed in military bases all around the country right now. And so the military's finding itself carrying a share of this burden. And frankly, at a time when the military's budget's been cut significantly and there's a lot to be asked of them. So I think as part of this, we need to talk about ensuring that the military has all of the resources it needs to protect our country and be able to do what the president's asking it to do.
Well, you were not only a major in the Air Force, you continue to serve in the reserve, and you served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you served at the border. We hear more and more about drug cartels funding and sponsoring this invasion of undocumented immigrants into this country. Isn't that a pressure point that our military should be looking at in Central and South America? And doesn't that cost money?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked the border in multiple capacities. One was in 2006 with Operation Jumpstart, taking troops to the border. But then more recently, I actually fly an ISR aircraft, an intelligence aircraft, and we flew the border to, look for people crossing in. And this was before the influx of children. We were seeing a lot of people crossing an overwhelming border patrol, many of whom had drugs that were, in essence, mules for these drug cartels. And now the cartels have figured out that not only can they make money on bringing children up here, but they can also use that distraction and the Border Patrol being distracted by the number of children to put more drugs over the border and, frankly, ultimately pollute our youth. So this is a very serious situation, plus the fact that ISIS or ISIL, the new Al-Qaeda, is probably looking and saying, man, if we want to sneak anybody into the United States, this is the time to do it. So I think this is beyond just a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of immigration. It is a national security issue and something that we ought to take very seriously lest this come up and bite us.
Well, Congressman, thank you for speaking out on this issue, and we'll have you back to see what goes forward on this issue. And thanks for your service.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Good to see you.